Justin, what strategies have you found the most effective so far in kind of trying to have as smooth a transition as possible from an employee to an owner, and kind of what advice could you give to others that are undergoing a similar type shift in their career?
I'd say there's probably a couple strategies that I've used personally. The first of which is just kind of staying grounded in myself and doing, and keep on doing the things, that got me here in the first place. I really kind of stayed afloat through the whole transition by recognizing that the change in title doesn't change who I am. Changing the email sigline doesn't mean that I'm a different person. I can still joke around. I can still dress casual on Friday, and I can still come in a little bit late in the morning to drop my kids, when I got to drop my kids off at school. That doesn't have to change just because you step into that different role.
What does it take to go from an engineer who's a technical professional or an employee to an owner in a firm? Well, in this week's episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I have with me Justin Keller. Justin is a licensed professional engineer and now president of Advanced Engineering and Design. And we're lucky to have him as he's actually going through this transition of becoming an owner. And he's going to share with us how it's going, what it entails, and what are some of the things that you can do as an engineer if you're making a transition to leadership or ownership in your organization. I'm Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering CEO. All right, now I want to welcome our guest on for today. Justin Keller is a licensed professional engineer. He's also the president of Advanced Engineering and Design. Justin, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm excited to have Justin on with us today. I know a lot of our listeners are civil engineering professionals. They're interested in ownership in the future, whether it's in a larger firm that they're a part of or their own firm. And we're going to talk a lot with Justin today about that specifically because he's kind of in that transition. It was a little while back that he became owner of a firm. So, he'll be clear with us that he's not an expert by any stretch. He's just into this transition, but we wanted to talk to him about how that transition is going for him and what it's been like. And so we're going to do that today. But I think a good part to start, Justin, is just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your background in terms of the type of engineering specifically that you do, and then tell us a little bit about the company.
Yeah. So Advanced Engineering and Design is a small business enterprise in SPE located within Pinellas County, which is part of the Tampa Bay market down here in Florida. We are a multidisciplinary firm, and our focus is really on public infrastructure and providing solutions to government clientele. We've been around for 26 years, and we've really been blessed to have a pretty impressive and diverse technical portfolio. Our 25th anniversary, which was about a year ago, marked the time that I took over as the president after working for the company for 17 years prior. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Florida, as well as a certified floodplain manager and Envision sustainability professional.
Awesome. So, you were a long time, been a technical professional, background in civil engineering. You were an employee of the firm for a while, and you transitioned into an ownership. Before we talk about the transition, tell us about what led to it. Like, was it something that you were aspiring to? Did it kind of come out of nowhere? How did you know you were going to be able to have ownership?
Well, early on, it became apparent that, let's say there wasn't somebody in the family who would take it over. And so, because I have, I think, displayed a pretty significant commitment to the firm, and kind of wiggled my way into being a pretty critical player, it was obvious that I would kind of be next in line, and that eventually, the owner would want to continue to have the Advanced Engineering and Design name live on. So really, kind of the conceptual understanding that I would become owner was probably in line for about a decade or so. And then really, as, the founder of the firm started to kind of determine his glide path to retirement, we started to kind of identify critical tasks and identify the steps that are needed in order to take it from just a high-level conversation to a signature on the page.
Okay, that's good. So you had some visibility for a while that it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. Not that necessarily made the transition any easier.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, it's, the founder started the company from scratch. And, certainly when you talk about business ownership, there's, really like two options. You either start something from the ground up or you purchase an established company. So when you start something from the ground up, that's your baby, and there's certainly a lot of emotional tie to the company. So as we navigated through the process, that became very apparent, certainly, and one of the things that I'm happy about is that sometimes those conversations can become a bit hairy, but the founder and I were able to maintain our relationship on the back end. And that was really a priority that we set early on in the process.
Yeah, that's great. And for those of you listening that maybe aren't familiar with the process like this, and we're going to talk to Justin about the leadership transition and some of the stuff that he's gone through, but just from a financial perspective, in case you're listening and this is something that interests you, is typically in a situation like this, if you were to look to buy ownership in a firm that maybe you worked for, there has to be a process like Justin described where, there probably have to be some kind of valuation of the company, right? So you can understand what that value is. And then, whatever the percentage is, whether it's the whole company or a majority stake in it of 50+%, then so that you would understand what that number is. And then there'd have to be obviously some kind of agreement in place to pay that over a certain amount of time, or depending on what that is and how much money you have available to you, or if you might take out a loan. So, I just want everyone to understand that there's absolutely risk involved for sure, right? You're kind of in a certain way betting on yourself, I would say, just like any business owner does really. But it is a viable option, as Justin said, other than starting on your own. It's an established business. People know the business. There's clients. There's income coming in. Obviously, Justin was there for a long time, so probably had a great relationships with a lot of the clients and things of that nature. But Justin, let's get into the kind of transition itself. And it's been, about a year or so now?
Yeah, it's been about a year and 2 weeks, but who's keeping track, right?
So just give us, and I know that, you're still in the midst of a transition, but just tell us for now, so far, how has that transition been going for you?
Well, I've been able to pay myself a salary, so that's good, right?
That's a good start.
Yeah, exactly. No, actually, certainly I would say everything's going about as good as I can imagine. I worked for the company for a long time, and so it really made the transition somewhat seamless to where I knew the projects, I knew the clients, I had very deep, I had very long-standing relationship with those clients, to where, let's say, the work transfer part of it was more or less, I don't think anybody from the outside really noticed the difference, which was good. And also too, because I mentioned earlier that, let's say for the decade prior, there was always an understanding that I'd be taking over ownership. And as my level of commitment grew in the firm, the amount of information about kind of the inner working and the nuts and bolts of the firm, the more information that the owner was willing to share with me. So I was certainly able to hit the ground running, so to speak, from understanding kind of the high level basics of, what goes on in day to day, let's say, keeping the lights on, and then also let's say the work product end of it. But that doesn't mean that I did not take my lumps. Anytime you are working under somebody, or you're not the one in that pilot seat, there's always you always want to question, well, why did somebody make that decision? Or there's certainly a better way to do that. The view changes when you switch chairs, and you start to be the one that pulls the lever, and you're like, oh, maybe that wasn't such a silly strategy to deal with this problem. And so, you have to learn what works for you, and the one thing that I found is that there's really no right and wrong way to do it. There were some, the prior management had procedures in place. A lot of them were good. And so we kept them. And then some of those that maybe didn't work with the way that I approach problems, I could change them. And kind of understanding that I didn't have to be bound by those prior procedures, or let's say that I could keep the ones in place in order to just make my life easier. That certainly was somewhat freeing throughout the process.
That's great. Justin, I should ask you this earlier, but how big is the company?
We are a small business, so we are 10 employees, and that's with some growth over the past year. So yeah, we are pretty much probably one of the smaller firms that you will be talking to the CEO for. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's small business, but at the end of the day, as the owner of the business, you're responsible for these 10 people getting their paychecks. No. That's the way I think about it. For me, I mean, I own a small business too. Mm-hmm. Not too many more people than that. And that's one of the things when I come to work every morning, that's kind of at the forefront of my mind, is that, I want to make sure that everyone's getting obviously their paychecks every couple of weeks. And that's certainly like an added pressure, I would say, on top of doing your everyday job that you have to do or other responsibilities. So I think regardless of the number of people, that's something to be aware of if you're out there thinking about ownership. You're the driver essentially in a lot of respects. I mean, maybe you're not doing sales for the entire time of your ownership, but you're still responsible for making sure that, your employees are supported financially.
No. And again, that's, our employees, their sole source of income is through advanced engineering and design, and so they're, the goals that they want to accomplish in life happen, through us continuing to keep the lights on. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly an added pressure, going into it, you think you understand it. And again, when you start signing the paychecks, you're like, okay, well, people's hopes and dreams and, buying homes and planning for retirement, all that is predicated on you doing your job and keeping the firm operating at a full or optimum efficiency.
So Justin, what strategies have you found the most effective so far in kind of trying to have as smooth a transition as possible from an employee to an owner? And kind of what advice could you give to others that are undergoing a similar type shift in their career?
I'd say there's probably a couple strategies that I've used personally. The first of which is just kind of staying grounded in myself and doing, and keep on doing the things, that got me here in the first place. I really kind of stayed afloat through the whole transition by recognizing that the change in title doesn't change who I am. Changing the email sigline doesn't mean that I'm a different person. I could still joke around. I could still dress casual on Friday, and I can, still come in a little bit late in the morning to drop my kids, when I got to drop my kids off at school. That doesn't have to change just because you step into that different role. And then also too, really trying to stay focused on the present. We just talked about the responsibilities of, let's say, making sure that you are getting enough cash flow in to write paychecks for your employees. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And that weight can be pretty heavy. And sometimes you can kind of get yourself caught up in the, kind of what ifing yourself to death with some of the worst case scenarios. And it can, especially early on, it kind of became paralyzing. What if I lose that client? What if this job doesn't come through? And then also too, on the flip side, I am so excited about the opportunities that, sometimes it's like I almost can't contain myself. We are nowhere near our final form, and I am so pumped about what the future holds. And I have no doubt that we're going to continue to grow and kind of expand our footprint outward. And while it's so important to plan and have, immediate, intermediate, and long-term goals, none of that happens if you don't stay in the present and kind of focus on what is needed today. Now, I'm talking about these. I certainly haven't perfected them, to where certainly, certainly, there's still growth going on, and I'm a human. I still have my sleepless nights, but again, just really kind of being who I, staying the person that I am, and staying in the present has really kind of gotten me through, and let's say, provided a clearer path towards kind of the next phase of this transition. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I think what Justin's talking about here is really important, because if you are a high level leader in your organization, let's say you have kids and you have a family, and all of a sudden you become the CEO and you're like staying late at work, and you're not really being with your family as much anymore. It's kind of like sending an example. You're setting the culture for the company of like, hey, if you want to become a high level leader, you kind of have to ignore your family, right? And that's not what you want to do. So I think the idea of continuing to kind of do what you've always done and kind of being that same person is good. And I think really what Justin's describing is really like kind of the idea of the culture of the company, because a lot of the higher level leaders in the organization, like what you do and the way you act is kind of going to set that tone for people. And I think that that's something that you definitely would have to think about, whether you're owner or just transitioning from a more of an individual contributor to more of a leader in the organization. I think that's something to keep in mind. And to me, just being a business owner myself, I think kind of the culture of the company is like the most important thing.
No, I mean, if you're stressed, people feel it. So kind of your emotional mindset really kind of governs the day, and, making sure that, I kind of stay in the present and understand that there's things that I can't control. Problems will find you, and, you can have a plan, and everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Right. But, it's about how you respond to that. And I think, your response to the challenges that will get thrown your way I think is really what matters to the people that are around you, both in your professional life, but also in your personal life.
So, Justin, I mean, it's easy to talk about the good things, but what have been some of the maybe unexpected challenges that you've encountered as you've gone through this transition, and how have you navigated them?
So I still very much am a seller doer, to where, I still am very much involved in design and project management and the work that goes out the door. So when you take those tasks and you add, kind of the ownership on top of that, the workload becomes pretty daunting. And I knew that, or I thought I knew that going into it. But, certainly the degree of time needed was really somewhat unexpected, and I'm an engineer. So there's like this primal urge to understand how the sausage is made,
Right.
So, and you don't just flip a switch and turn that off. So as you become an owner, and things like payroll and balance sheets and profit and loss statements and tax strategies and employment law and all these things are thrown at you, you didn't become a good engineer by just ignoring certain things. And so why would you ignore these, And I feel like I'm doing myself a disservice if I don't invest the time to understand those, to make sure that I'm understanding the foundational elements of business ownership. So that was certainly something that has, kind of allocated a lot of my time that I didn't plan for. But what's kind of heartening is that I am coming out of the back end of that, to where, I have a year worth of payroll cycles under my belt. I have a year-end close, to where I'm starting to understand some of the more logistical elements, just from general ownership, that aren't really pertinent to engineering. It's just any company, And so, really being able to feel more comfortable and putting those onto, let's say, my external team, accountants, legal representatives, stuff like that, has really given me some time back into my day to focus on what's important.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that this is a challenge in our industry for multiple reasons. One, a lot of engineers just struggle in general to go from technical professional to project manager to begin with, for a lot of the reasons that you said, right? We're so used to the calculations, we want to keep doing them. But then at your level, going maybe from where that project manager, department manager to kind of owner, president, it's just another level of that transition. And I would think it's even a little bit harder in a smaller company like yours, because you don't have the staff to say, hey, can you pick up some of the technical work for me? Because I'm doing like more president type stuff.
No, I mean,
there isn't that staff, that stable of people per se. But I do think that some of the things you said there, like having a good team, whether it's legal representatives, financial, consultants, et cetera, that you can lean on here and there to help you with some of that. And, I think and speaking from my own experience too, whatever the business is, you just have to understand the numbers. And if there are certain dashboards and reports that you can get on a regular basis, in engineering, I would imagine it's like your workload, your backlog, your AR, things of that nature, right? Once you have an understanding of those key metrics and you're measuring them on a regular basis, that can be a big help. And, it sounds like you're starting to really get help with that, or you have starting to get that under your belt, and that's going to make the whole transition better.
Yeah. And, you'd almost like, just like anything you do in life, right? It's like, the first time you do it, you kind of feel like you're, let's say, hitting all the bumpers on the bowling lane, so to speak. But really, once you start to kind of understand, okay, like I know generally from cash flow, I need between X amount per quarter. And then, yearly revenue, we're looking at, and then once you start to understand those numbers, and really, especially from a business standpoint, understanding, let's say, the ebbs and flows of cash flow, because that's really what it is too. It's like, okay, well, if I, need X amount of money at this time, okay, well, when, how do you set up your invoicing to accomplish that?
Right.
The beauty of going from, let's say, a team member to an owner within that same company is that some of that stuff I was able to kind of get in place before, let's say the keys were handed over. So that did really make it a lot easier to where I wasn't doing everything all at once. But certainly getting to where, again, I have just a more general comfort about what our overall yearly expenses are going to be, where the tight months are going to be. And, it does make it to where I can trust more in my accountant. I can trust more in the numbers that they're providing, because I understand what money goes into what buckets. And, again, it's just like it's really just like engineering, to where, your first water line design, you're going to be uncomfortable throughout the whole thing.
Right.
But as you start to do it, you just have a feel for it. And, again, I'm certainly, nowhere near that expert level, but having the year under my belt does, I do feel more comfortable in my own skin.
That's great. So, Justin, your company has successfully remained multidisciplinary while being relatively small size. How do you maintain that balance, and kind of what advantages does this approach provide in the competitive market today?
Well, we didn't become multidisciplinary overnight. We were kind of built on serving as an extension of staff to our clientele. And to really live out that mantra, you don't turn down tasks because they may not meet your profitability goals, or, you may not be as efficient in those tasks as you want to. So really the process kind of happened organically by completing just a lot of projects over multiple decades with the same design team. And that was certainly really important to be I was really fortunate to be a big part of that design team. Now, to stay multidisciplinary, that takes more purposeful planning and, training and team continuity. Our portfolio, I think, does speak for itself, but as you go after pursuits, there is more emphasis weighted on projects that are more recent. So you need to make sure that, when you look at your backlog, you can't lump it into one number. You almost got to put it into different buckets, or almost like little discipline buckets, to make sure that, okay, if I'm running light on one product line, okay, I need to make sure that I go out and I, let's say, see what opportunities may be out there to kind of supplement that side of the business. And also to stay technically diverse, staff development and retention is really critical. From a development standpoint, I think that responsibility starts with me. I still want to stay, let's say, involved in the design. And I also make it a point to diversify what projects I'm involved in, both from the design and project management end, to make sure that I keep my skills sharp. Again, I'm the kind of the face of the company, so to speak. Scary concept, right? So certainly it's important that I keep honed and I stay multidisciplinary in my skill set as well, in order to market the company effectively. And oftentimes when a teammate may come up and let's say express interest in understanding, let's say other aspects of the public infrastructure design world, it's my job to really nurture those interests. And, cross-training does come at an expense, whether that's through like third-party training costs, or let's say not being as efficient with the project budget as you may want to. But I want people to leave AED as better engineers than they came. So in order to kind of, let's say, live by that mantra, we need to invest in our staff. Does it impact the bottom line somewhat? Yeah. But I recognize that, we all had to learn at one point in time, right? Nobody came out of the womb understanding engineering. So giving our team kind of the space to grow, and knowing that, the firm's performance is really, let's say, more of an assembly of projects and not just, each individual project siloed in its own space, really gives people wider lanes to kind of drive faster and have some more wiggle room, so we can get better results in the long run.
Yeah, that's great. And I really like the idea I love the idea of professional development. That's why we do what we do at EMI. But I really like the idea of what you said in terms of the different services, and really keeping a good eye on kind of like the profitability of each of those different services, so that you can, understand that it makes sense to continue to offer the different services, and, pay attention to one more than another when it needs it, per se, because, I think that's something that I could easily see someone losing sight of when you get really tangled up in projects.
Yeah.
And, not stepping back and looking at the big picture of the business and the kind of the different profit centers, if you will, or different services. So that seems like a big one. So the next thing I want to ask you about is something that I think all companies struggle with today in our industry, whether it's 10 people or 10,000 people, is this idea of innovation, AI, all these new things that are happening. Especially for you, you're still focused on design to some degree, but how are you ensuring that, innovation really remains a core part of your process at AED, while you continue to maintain very high quality standards, and meet client expectations?
So, I think in order to actually implement innovation, whether that, or, let's say implement any kind of new technology or procedure into your workflow, you have to come into it fully understanding what the benefits are, who realize those benefits, who actually, let's say, how does it benefit you as an entity? How does it benefit your client? How does it improve the product on the back end? And then also, what are those secondary or, let's say, accessory applications, to where you have to make that go, no-go call early on in a project's life, in my opinion. And again, I don't think you necessarily have to jump at every new opportunity or any new tool that may be out there, but you certainly have to make sure that you're evaluating them. Again, it has to be right time, right place, right application. Really, that is kind of my responsibility to make sure that I am not being stuck in the, it's worked before, so we'll keep on doing it until it doesn't work mindset. And generally, I am more of the dip my toe in the water rather than dive head first kind of approach. So, as there will be changes coming to the industry, it changed before, and it's going to change again. And so really, it's about not only staying on top of what those opportunities are or where those opportunities are to innovate, but also kind of recognizing the right time to pretty much, let's say, flip the switch and actually implement them within a specific project.
Yeah, I like that approach as well, where you have a criteria essentially that you can look through for, okay, we see this new software. Yeah. Let's take a look if it checks the boxes that we need to maybe take a closer look at it. If not, we'll let it go for now. We'll keep our eyes open for other things. So I think it's good to have some kind of approach where you are evaluating different innovation, AI that's coming forward that could potentially be very helpful for you. But there's got to be some kind of a criteria or checklist or questions that you can go through for these things, or else you'll be, it's like a million shiny objects that you'll be following all over the place. And so I think that's just a generally actually a good approach in business is whenever you need to make decisions, you need to have some kind of criteria to evaluate it so that you're not winging it and saying, you have some kind of process in place, but also you don't want to miss something that could be beneficial. I mean, if you find some kind of software that, really improves how quickly you could deliver your projects and maybe even the quality of your projects for your clients, you obviously want to take a serious look at it. Mm-hmm. So having a process to do that.
I'm sure as you know, Anthony, it's like there is no shortage of people reaching out to you, telling you how their widget will make you better as a business owner, right? Like that is, those distractions are constantly out there, but it is your responsibility as, let's say, the leader of the firm or the leader of your organization to allocate time to evaluate those, and that's really hard to do. Again, we've talked about how, kind of the minutes are fleeting in the day. So when you add, let's say, product evaluation or, new software evaluation to that list, it becomes a bit daunting. But you have to do it. Or if you don't, you're going to be wondering why you got left behind.
For sure. So business development, sales, it's the bloodline of every company, especially a small business that needs to survive and thrive. How involved are you in it? And how do you balance it with everything else you're doing, like the design work, the finance stuff? Talk to us about business development and sales.
Well, so, certainly letting go has been something that I am still learning on how to do that. And
every other business.
Yeah, I'm about to say, and I, what's good is that I have listened to other interviews you've done, and I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one. So, that is really good to hear. But again, because what really is unique about business development is that it takes so long to build those relationships, and all it takes is one phony sales pitch to ruin them. So the relationships that we have is really like the most important asset that AED has. So when we talk about business development, we've actually brought on some support for that task. And essentially that will be a transition to where what we're looking to do is recognizing that I can be everywhere at all times means that there will need to be a change, and we're in the process of, or we're going through that as we speak. And how we're tackling it is that we're going to do a little bit at a time, to where we've done introductory meetings, and then we're going to, and after the introductory meeting, we're going to go ahead and we're going to, let's say, communicate together with a client. And then once we communicate together with a client, well, now you be the primary and I'll be the secondary, let's say, contact for the client. And then eventually the final phase would be kind of that full transition to or the full transition to the business development manager. But also too, for me, it's important that I stay in the loop as far as, let's say, what pursuits we would want to, we'd want to approach. And then also, again, ensuring that how we're going about marketing is a way that feels organic to me, and because again, people work with us because we're easy to work with and we don't push things on people. And so I don't want, kind of the fear is getting somebody in there who feels that it's their job to pretty much go and, extract as much blood as you can. It's like, no, that's not how we operate. And so really kind of being able to share those fundamental approaches to business development has really been the first big step, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to hear that you are enlisting some help in that area. It's obviously a critical area for growth of any company. But I think one thing that you said there that's really important to reinforce is relationships. First of all, relationships are everything in our business. We know that, but they take a long time to develop. But like you said, one bad project, that relationship can go away, and could be years in the making. And, someone doesn't quality control the project and something happens, and then that whole relationship is gone. And so that's definitely something to think about for all of you listening out there. And I think the other thing that's important to note is, even though you might enlist others in helping with business development, like Justin's doing, as designers, as project managers, when you deliver projects, you're doing sales, because most of the firms in the industry are basically focused on repeat work. It's probably 70% or more repeat work, repeat clients. So just by doing a great job on your project, believe it or not, you're doing sales because you want them to come back again. So I think that's something that you have to keep in mind as an engineer, as a project manager, is that you may not be going out there and calling people or writing proposals at this point of your career, but just by giving the client timely reports on the projects, making sure that their project is quality controlled, everything looks really good, you're delivering on time, on budget, you're doing business development because you're building the relationship. So I think, to Justin's point, it's probably something that's really good to get some help in when you can, but at the same time, keep in mind that by building relationships consistently, you are doing business development, whether you like it or not, or whether you don't think of it of that. And as you grow in your career, those relationships are going to be really important for the growth of the firm going forward. That's a key thing.
No, yeah, and too, that's a really good point when you talk about the project is business development in itself. It's like anytime you touch that client, whether it's through written or verbal communication, it's like you got to make sure that you maintain a professional tone. You got to make sure that you maintain that you are pretty much developing that relationship with every bit of correspondence you do, and so it's just important to understand that, and that's why let's say me handing some of that off is going to be a bit of a process. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, just think about your own personal experience. If you do have a contractor do some work at your house and it goes really well, the next time you have a project, who are you going to call? You're going to call that person again because they did a good work. So the same applies in engineering. So it's something for everyone to keep in mind. So Justin, what's one kind of final piece of advice that you could share with technical professionals that are kind of transitioning into these new ownership, leadership roles in their careers?
Yeah, the one thing too, before I get to that, I do want to thank you for having me on. I mentioned earlier that I've been listening to your podcast for years. So it is kind of surreal that I'm sitting here talking to you on a CEO podcast, but I guess, hey, kind of life comes at you full speed, huh?
That's right.
I would say as far as advice, it'd really be, kind of prioritizing yourself, which sounds a bit selfish, but again, it's about kind of maintaining your physical and mental health. And this is kind of a relatively new revelation for me. So, why don't you call me back in a year and we'll see how I'm doing. We're not robots and we do have limits. And I have made a concerted effort to try to stay physically active to make sure that I can offset all the hours that I spend hunched over this computer. Yeah. And also too, I have kids and a family. And to be honest, they're more important than any email or task that I have to get done. So to make sure that I can kind of prioritize those relationships and making sure that I, set time aside for those to where more or less reinforce, or let's say provides mental health benefits for me, to kind of keep those relationships fresh and healthy. And, just making sure that you don't run yourself into the ground, because it's really easy to do.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I would offer the same advice just from my own experience over the last 13 years or so trying to build up EMI is if you're not keeping yourself in shape physically, mentally, you're just not going to be able to grow the business. You're not going to be able to do your job. You're not going to be able to support people at work or at home.
Yeah.
Because you're just going to you're going to run out of gas. I mean, I tell people this all the time that I work with is that it's great that we're selling a lot of training programs, but Anthony Fasano can only do so much training. So unless we keep getting more instructors and training them, I will run out of gas. And so, and it's true. It's the truth. And you got to just be honest to everybody and let them know.
No, and to be honest, I never thought that I'd be the one running out of gas. It's like, well, that's everybody else. That's not me. Oh no, that's me too. There is a point of saturation to where, and again, it is so easy to say, but it is so hard to actually implement. And it's a skill. It's a skill that I still need to get better at. And I hope over time that I will continue to, improve upon that and, let's say, live by those words.
Yeah. It's funny you say it'll catch up with you too. I know this sounds corny, but I'll watch like Rocky IV every couple of weeks because I try to say to myself, I can take a beating and I could just keep moving forward. And my son's like, Dad, you're not really Rocky, right? I'm like, you're right. No, none of us is like Rocky, right? None of us can unlimited take a beat and do that kind of stuff and keep going. So it is something to remember for everybody out there. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO or not. The engineering industry is demanding. The project work that we do is demanding, and you need to take a break.
Yeah, no,
rest up and
if you wait until you're done, imperative. You'll never be done. So
right, you'll never be done. The list never ends of things you have to do. So once again, Justin Keller, AED, congratulations on the CEO. I know you're still going through the transition. Sounds like you're doing a great job, but we're lucky to get you on here to talk a little bit about how that transition has gone, and we do really appreciate the time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I hope that, let's say, my experiences can help somebody out in the future.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Justin and hearing him say what he just said a few minutes ago about how he's listened to the podcast for so long as an engineer, and now he's on a CEO podcast. Really kind of makes me feel good because that was my goal of starting this company. That was my goal of starting to do content, was helping technical professionals go from the technical aspects of their career into management and leadership. And I'm happy to see that Justin is living proof that if you put the work in, if you build yourself up, you can become a leader. If you enjoyed the interview, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.